Hi there, and thanks for joining us on this webinar about maximizing student engagement with phenomena. My name's Francis Vigent. I'm CEO here at NoAtom, but also a former teacher myself, and I have taught elementary, middle school, and even high school. So I've had quite a bit of experience at all the different levels. What I hope to do today is to share a bit with you about what it means to use phenomena to drive teaching and learning. And I want to be really upfront that understanding the relationship between phenomena and practices and how that shapes classroom teaching and learning provides a kind of framework for mastering these new next generation science standards, whether you are an adaptive or an adoptive state. So something to kind of keep in mind with this is that the next generation science standards being three-dimensional, it's not purely about skills, it's not purely about content, it's not purely about systems thinking, it's about the combination of all those pieces and whether or not a student has developed a level of mastery as to whether they can approach sort of a circumstance and call on those three dimensions in order to perform the expectations of the standards. So in today's discussion, what I'd like to focus on are these four high-level areas. Number one being why phenomena. Number two, how phenomena is central to this next-generation aligned instructional model. And that has implications for curriculum. If you don't have a next-generation designed curriculum, you're going to find yourself either making a lot of changes or getting to know the difference over the next couple of years, as many people are already starting to see that. Next, how do phenomena impact student learning? And finally, what are sort of the 5 steps for phenomena to drive teaching and learning? So what is that process, or in a sense, the framework that we can follow in our classrooms to pull phenomena through everything that we're doing so that it is really the mode of teaching and learning. Okay. A couple notes for folks on the live session. We have both non-users, we have NoAtom users and non-users in this session, and there are hundreds and hundreds of you. So my goal here today is to make this session helpful to everyone. And if you're on the live session, you'll notice that you have a little sort of orange arrow on your screen, and that'll reveal a question bar for you. So we will have a brief question and answer at the end of the live session, and if you'd like to participate, you can click on that orange button. It'll reveal the box, and feel free to drop any questions that you have in there. And if you're not on the live session, feel free to reach out to us online. You can contact us at noatom.com, and my name again is Francis. You can reference me by name, and someone will get that to me, and I'll respond. Okay, so let's jump in here. What are phenomena? Well, phenomena are real-world context. It is a real-life context, and what is key about phenomena is that it gives purpose to the work of a scientist or an engineer. People don't just hire scientists and engineers because they remember facts. And that is sort of the traditional model of instruction, is teaching facts and defining mastery by recall of those facts or being able to summarize something. With these next generation science standards, it's all about putting students into the role of scientist and engineer. And so if a student is going to be a scientist and engineer in the classroom, if that's going to be the mode of learning, there needs to be a context for it or a purpose for it. Now, phenomena break into two branches in these standards. There's the science and there's the engineering. So as a scientist, phenomena is a complex real-world context that is something like coastal flooding or coral bleaching, glaciers receding, something like all of the debate around climate change, all of these sort of little nuances that pop up in the media. All of these things are complex real-world phenomena, but it's not limited to climate change. You can look out your window any time of day or night, and you will see real-world phenomena happening. Now, scientists are trying to deepen their knowledge around it. Why does that happen, for example? and then use an experiment to pursue that question towards an evidence-based conclusion. For an engineer, it's all about a problem. So looking at something like coastal flooding, scientists are obviously going to be engaged in trying to understand why coastal flooding occurs, but an engineer's interest in that scenario would be trying to figure out how they can use their knowledge of science to actually solve the issue of the water coming inland and perhaps flooding homes or businesses and roads. So it's some people think of it as more practical, and that's not, I don't think the best definition is not practicality. What it really is, it's solving a problem. Okay, so scientists are answering questions through experimentation. Engineers are solving problems through prototyping, which is its own type of experimentation. Okay, so the kind of things that are going to be phenomena for engineers are maybe street flooding, but fuel efficiency, being able to produce electricity and store electricity, observing things that we can never travel to, objects that are far away, even traffic patterns, things like this, okay? So maybe you're familiar with this image, but this image is from the Next Generation Science Standards. This is an evidence statement, okay? This is from grade 4 life science. The big question here is, why are phenomena central to next generation instruction? It's because there are observable features of mastery. Okay, the next generation science standards, or even the adaptations of those standards, are performance expectations. So as a result of mastering a standard, a student needs to be able to perform the expectation of that standard, which you should ask, hopefully, would be the next question would be, well, what are those expectations of the standard? And so these evidence statements help break that apart for us. So what you see here is that a student who has mastered this particular grade 4 life science standard is going to be able to support their claim, identify, so which implies making a claim, and you see that there in under A, 1A, students make a claim. They need to be able to identify scientific evidence, and part of that purpose of identifying the evidence, and it's specific to life science here, is to use it to support the as part of evaluating and critiquing their own approach. So that's why you see here under 3A, it says students determine the strengths and weaknesses of evidence. It may be their own, it may be somebody else's. It really should be both. And you see things like determining relevancy and whether the support is sufficient. Okay, and number 4, you see reasoning and synthesis. So a student is not only making a claim, gathering evidence, and using that evidence to evaluate and critique their own work and others, but they're actually doing all of this and reasoning in order to come to an evidence-based conclusion about something. So that's where you see under 4A in the subparts, students use reasoning to connect the relevant and appropriate evidence and construct an argument that includes the idea that plants and animals have structures and so on. So the reason I'm starting at this level is that a student is never going to be able to perform the expectations of the standards if they have not learned in context, if they have not had the opportunity to develop and use knowledge in order to answer questions and solve problems the way scientists and engineers do. Because that is where students actually develop the science and engineering practices dimension. It's where they connect the disciplinary core ideas and where those disciplinary core ideas gain relevance. And it's where the cross-cutting concepts, sort of that systems thinking dimension, comes to life right in front of them. Okay, and that's why these evidence statements are sort of the counter to the other bookend to the standard itself. So this is the standard, the performance expectation, which those performance expectations we're talking about. So all of that had to do with just this one standard and these elements of the 3 dimensions beneath it. Okay, so you might think, well, that's relatively technical, okay, lots of charts, but back to maximizing student engagement with the phenomenon, how does that play out in the classroom? So I want to give you a little example. One of the things we often see is that classrooms are very focused on task. So what you see here is sort of 3 different tasks around counting tree rings. And you can imagine if you're an elementary teacher, you've probably seen students doing this, or if you're a middle school life science teacher, you may have seen students doing this or asked them to do it, where students will go and determine the age of a tree by counting its rings. Okay, so what's the purpose of that? That's the big question that students are asking themselves, and that as teachers with these next generation science standards, we need to ask ourselves. And the traditional answer has been, well, students need to learn plant structures and sort of plant growth and development, and this is part of that. Maybe it's part of that, but the thing is that there's no phenomena. There's a difference between task and phenomena, and I'm going to try to explain that to you. So a task is not necessarily connected to phenomena. It's sort of an operational thing you do, whether it's a chart on the wall, counting, and in this case it's fictitious, which this doesn't even really is not a good representation of what a tree and tree rings look like in real life. This is a little better, and a lot of people would say, oh well, this is hands-on. That involves phenomena because that's real wood they're counting, and the answer is maybe, but not necessarily. So here's how phenomena works. Phenomena doesn't start with a task the way that those images I just showed you did. Phenomena starts with something like this. And if you have a color screen in front of you and it's large enough, you'll see that there's a picture of a forest. And in the forest, there are a bunch of trees that appear brown and perhaps dead. And so that is a phenomena. That is a real life context. A forest of living and dead trees that actually appears like it's on a hillside or a mountainside. And so we can begin asking ourselves, why are these trees brown? Why are they dead? Are they dead? How long have they lived? What's causing them to die? And so we can begin to have a rich discussion around that, putting ideas forward, and then beginning to pull on what we know. Perhaps we know the requirements of life. What do plants need in order to live? We know things about the geology, perhaps. What is the difference between a plain and a hillside or a mountainside like this? Are there clues that we can pull from the image? And then what that discussion leads to are things like perhaps it's caused by drought, students may suggest, or perhaps it's the result of a fire. Or perhaps students will say that this is caused by drought, but it's important because it can lead to a fire. Because trees that are no longer living are no longer taking up water, and so on and so forth. And so it may become fuel for forest fires in this area. And that is a very different way of approaching a task like counting rings, because a student may then go from that level of questioning to say, well, how old are the trees? Perhaps they have reached the end of their life cycle, or perhaps it's a cycle of drought, and we could look at the thickness of the rings. And so now a task like counting rings has purpose based on the phenomena in the discussion that we've had as a group, and the implications of something like dead trees or something like drought. Could it be signaling that our farms are going to be affected next? Who knows? Okay, but this task only has relevance because of the phenomena. Okay, we're counting rings perhaps because we want to know how old the trees are, because we know that they have a certain finite life cycle. Okay, now phenomena, and I'll give you another example of this in a second. Phenomena impacts student learning because not only does it give purpose and relevance to the task, but it is where students are actually engaging all 8 of those science and engineering practices, okay? the phenomena is a kind of, when I keep saying context, what I mean is it's a kind of fabric or a kind of space for building and anchoring and exploring ideas. And that's why it needs to be real world, and that's why it needs to be very complex. It's not something we can replicate in our classroom. If you can replicate it in your classroom, it's not an anchor phenomena. Okay, it's probably more of an organizational thread, or what we would call an investigative phenomena. Now, I'm going to go through this in more granularity in a second, but those science and engineering practices are one of the key areas that teachers who are used to a traditional model of instruction, delivering that type of instruction, delivering content, a lot of people will say, these science engineering practices are practices that are required of the student. And it's not that necessarily you're requiring it of the student by saying, do this. It's really not the right way to do it. It's that students are engaged in a context, and through that, they are being challenged and they are developing skills which you're coaching them and setting expectations for them to use these skills, help them understand what the skills are and what they mean. But really, they are the ones that are deciding, to what depth and which skill and when. And then as an educator, we're providing the accountability, and we are playing the role of interested skeptic. And what I mean by that is we're not asking a question and giving an answer. We are interested in the student's ideas, and we are asking questions that require higher order thinking, the creating, evaluating, and analyzing, in order to push students to develop and use that phenomena context further. Okay, and to push them into new areas of thinking. And so that's where students build these skills and have the opportunity to build these skills to ask questions and define problems, to develop models, to plan and carry out investigations, to not only interpret data, but analyze it, gather it, think mathematically, construct explanations, design solutions, argue from evidence, and obtain, evaluate, and communicate information. All of these things happen in the context of the phenomena, okay? And what I showed you with those pictures a second ago is just sort of an example of that. Now, I want to be upfront that teaching this way is something that takes time. Learning to teach this way takes time, even for experienced teachers. It's an art. Art is communication. It's engineered communication. And so learning to communicate and ask questions in the ways that is required to push students to, plan appropriately, develop models without telling students, or to help them connect with the relevance without trying to tell them the relevance of something, because that doesn't work. That takes just time and requires trust. That's a big piece of it. It requires trust in the students and in ourselves, because it requires a release of responsibility. If the release of responsibility doesn't occur, then the opportunity for the thinking, the opportunity to engage the rigor, to make appropriate mistakes and to learn from those is not something students ever get to engage in, because somebody took control and didn't create that opportunity, okay? So back to this phenomena. I sort of led you down the path of thinking that this was drought, but perhaps it is. But I wonder if perhaps in the back of your mind you thought that it might be something like the Asian longhorn beetle. So perhaps we go through an investigation, we have this phenomena, and students come to the conclusion that it is inconclusive, or that drought isn't a factor. Okay, they've gone through, they've considered the options, they've designed an experiment, they've counted the rings, they have seen that waterfall is pretty consistent, and there's no evidence of drought, and so on and so forth. Could it be bugs, insects? Now, there's also hybrids where could it be drought conditions making trees susceptible to insects? So they actually could be playing off of each other. where the drought weakens the tree but doesn't kill it, and then the insect gets a foothold, the tree can't defend itself and actually destroys the tree. So the purpose of me using this explanation is not so that you go back to your classroom and show this picture and talk about drought and count rings and bring bugs into it and whatever. The reason I'm explaining this is that the phenomena is complex to the point where it gives us a lot of entry points, but it also gives us a lot of variables where students, as they're exploring, even if they're all exploring the same question or problem and trying to come to that evidence-based conclusion, are most likely going to come to different conclusions. And that's important because the goal is not for every student to come with the same answer. The goal is for every student to go through, develop an experiment, carry that out, gather their data, and then come to a conclusion which they can defend and others can consider. So it's evidence-based, well-articulated, is logical in its construction. But the key here is that during a debrief, and I'm going to walk you through this process now, it creates the opportunity for students with different conclusions to consider their own work, sort of engage in that reflection and sort of the metacognitive skills that are involved here, but also to collaborate and to compare their work to others' work and to consider others' ideas. So it's a whole new level of collaboration and really scientific argumentation, which again is on our list of science and engineering practices. So I'd like to take you through sort of in a more granular sense, or maybe a more practical sense, depends on how you look at it, how we can use phenomena most effectively in the classroom. So a big difference with NGSS is that process is a part of teaching and learning, okay? And process is different than routine. So routine, you know, an elementary school routine may be coming into the classroom, taking off our coat, hanging it up, and there's sort of maybe a certain order, getting our book and going to our seat, and that sort of a thing. Changing the order of the elements in the routine does not change the outcome, okay? It might make things a little chaotic or something like this, but you know, your coat doesn't melt because you put it on the hook after you got your book and vice versa. A process has dependencies. So as you go from one element of a process to the next in learning, you're actually gaining momentum and you're adding value to the next part of the process, okay? So that's really key. The next generation science standards really benefit from process, and that's why, you know, these practices are referred to in the NRC literature and in the Achieve literature as being applied in process. They stop short at saying what that process is. So what I'm going to show you is a process that we have used, that NoAtom users use and go through, but anybody can do it. We found it to be most effective operationally, sort of practically in class, but also in the data. And we can actually tell a difference when people are not engaging students in these processes. So between those who do and don't, it's really quite stark contrast. So nonetheless, here's how it works. So first of all, starting with an anchor phenomena, right? Remember, an anchor phenomena is complex, real-world context, and it forms a kind of thread through the lesson, the unit, and it fits into a storyline from one unit to the next. And it has to be something that's too complex to replicate. Just like that picture of the woods with the dead trees. I can't build a forest in my classroom. Okay, I can't replicate that phenomena here and now. But students can encounter it through informal observation in their everyday lives, through nonfiction text, through video, through just environmental interaction. You know, if you live in a community where maybe there are forests or trees. Now, that anchor phenomena is the foundation, the platform, that kind of fabric where students are going to, or as educators, we want students to become dissatisfied with their level of understanding about elements of that phenomena, okay? So kind of the second part here is all around dissatisfaction with our understanding, in the case of engineering, the fact that this is a problem. Okay, so what this is about is a collaborative reflection on the phenomena. That's how students get the value out of it and engage the practices. It's also sort of that academic honesty that, as we're going through that, we may think things that we lack evidence for. Okay, we have a strong inclination, or we really believe it, but we may not have evidence for it. And so students tend, the best way that we've found to engage students in this is, let's say that we go from anchor phenomena in a nonfiction reading, is to then transition into a Socratic dialogue. And so if you're not familiar with Socratic dialogue, and we have a soccer circle tool that our users use, which is a kind of a group chat actually that gets layered on this. So Socratic dialogue is all about asking higher order questions. So questions that require students to create, evaluate, and analyze in order to respond. Inner circle, outer circle Socratic dialogue or Socratic seminar is where your class is split into two, where an inner circle is allowed to sort of be verbal and build verbally as a group discussion. And then there's an outer circle that's listening, and in our case, it's optional, but using iPads or their own devices or laptops or something like that, are holding the same discussion, building on what folks are talking about verbally in the inner circle, but also building on the ideas that are being sort of chatted about in the outer circle. And of course, the teacher kind of has a moderating platform for this. So the piece of Socratic dialogue here is that we are training students to bring their ideas to the table, to be in the front row, whether they're in the inner circle or outer circle at any given moment, to bring those ideas forward and to do so with academic honesty and to appropriately build on the ideas of others or have a dissenting opinion. That is just as valuable as having, an idea, as the ability to take somebody else's idea and have a counterclaim, or support that with evidence, or refute it with evidence. So this is key. If you have done any work in your schools with accountable talk, where you teach children accountable talk techniques, this is very similar. So it's changing the role of teacher from sort of a sage on the stage, the content expert handing out facts and pre-teaching content and all of this, to let's engross the students in that anchor phenomena right from the get-go, and then let's pull from them and teach them how to pull from each other using higher order questions, the relevance and connection to it, and let's expose a level of dissatisfaction with what we know. Let's expose the limits of what we know. And so through that process, the students are engaging in, again, almost all 8 of these practices here. You see that there's some intentionally missing because they don't get applied in this particular context, but students are asking questions, defining problems, developing conceptual models. They're analyzing each other's opinions, the data that's being presented, elements from reading, elements from some of the video that they may have seen in the unit, and so on. And so it's really important, again, to recognize that in the process of using this phenomena and making it, really maximizing the students' engagement with it, that what we're doing is we are maximizing their opportunity to engage with the ideas, to build on those ideas, to find personal relevance in those ideas, and to engage in the practices of science and engineering. And that's key in actually developing those practices as a habit, which is sort of back to my initial discussion points around the evidence statements and that grid I showed you that was sort of that black and white grid. If students are truly mastering the standards, they're going to need to produce evidence of mastery almost as habit, okay? That's going to be the expectation, and this is how you build that. So the next stop, once we've sort of gone through that Socratic dialogue phase, is that we come to that dissatisfaction, to the problem that hasn't been solved, or the what we believe that we have no evidence for yet. And so that leads us to a question or a problem. Okay, so if we're going to take on a scientific role as a scientist, we are going to deal with developing out a question towards an evidence-based conclusion. If we are going to take on an engineering role as a student, then we are going to identify a problem and then pursue that problem to an evidence-based solution through prototyping. And both of those are sort of process-oriented. Now, the question or problem is the actual platform for the inquiry. Okay, that is what we are investigating. Okay, either the problem or the question. So you see, the problem or question comes from the two things that came before, right? The anchor phenomena and the dialogue. So this is where, again, we're dealing with a process and not a routine. Unfortunately, sort of the worksheet, textbook kind of kit, the traditional kit anyway, approach to things is all about routine and sort of isolating different pieces and then doing them discreetly, and they are disconnected, or they can be disconnected from each other. Okay, under next generation science standards, to reach mastery of a three-dimensional standard, which all the standards are, requires this process kind of approach. So now that we're at the point of a problem or question, that helps us identify, or us being the students, okay, helps the student identify the process that they need to use to resolve it, okay? And they encounter that through actually planning their own, and by their own, I mean they can be in teams of two. I don't recommend larger than teams of two because you get a diffusion of responsibility across larger and larger teams, but students encounter problems and questions through the planning process, and it really happens at that transition point, okay, from Socratic dialogue into their partnerships, okay, where they're going to now plan an investigation and then carry it out. So at that phase, students are engaged in these 5 science and engineering practices, okay? So the question problem is obvious, but the planning of the investigation is the development of a model, okay? It's literally planning an investigation. And they're doing it from their own ideas, okay? Their own ideas about that anchor phenomena, about the things they discussed, about the things they care about the personal relevance. So you can see that it's building without us actually having to tell students why this is important to them, because that doesn't work. It's actually being pulled from students, and they're getting multiple. We're already on our 3rd opportunity with some of these science and engineering practices in order to experience them and master them, okay? And again, the context is sort of the disciplinary core idea element, right? And so the science and engineering practices are the practices dimension. And then as it comes to life, in number 4 here, the investigative phenomena, we're going to begin connecting with cross-cutting concepts, okay? So number 4, the investigative phenomena is what students see in front of them as they carry out those science and engineering investigations. The experiments, we call them labs, okay, as they carry out the experiments that they planned or the prototypes that they planned. So they plan the lab. The lab's not given to them, okay? And so in the case of a question, if you're not familiar with this, leads us towards a scientific process, or a problem leads us towards an engineering design process, because one involves prototyping and the other doesn't. It's slightly different, okay? And for folks who may be thinking now, scientific method, that's dated, it's outdated, so on and so forth. Scientific method, with capital letters, like the scientific method, and the idea of making that into kind of a worksheet process, a worksheet routine, is dated, okay? Process is not dated. Scientific inquiry is not dated. And lowercase scientific method and lowercase engineering design process is not dated. In fact, it has never been more relevant than in these new standards. And all you have to do is talk to a technologist, anybody who's engaged in science or engineering professionally. I'm not talking as a salesperson. I'm talking about as somebody who's patenting something. And you will hear the importance of process. Now, process varies. from one organization to the next, and its design and so on. But all process is replicable, it's logical, and it's scalable, and its purpose is to help communicate and replicate findings. And in the real world of patenting and so on, it makes our claims something that we can own. It's actually a process for the development of intellectual property. So these are really important. Okay, and that's why, again, the switch to next generation science standards really comes from industry and from National Research Council and so on, sort of the chief innovators in our society, saying, hey, we don't need students who can compete with Google for remembering and recalling facts. We need students who can develop and use what they know in order to solve problems, answer questions, and come to evidence-based conclusions about what others claim and about what they think and about new discoveries and so on. That's part of being a literate citizen. So the fourth, and there's only one more, there's only 5 here, so don't worry, hang on. The fourth is investigative phenomena and process. So investigative phenomena is just a thread of that anchor phenomena that students are experimenting with, and that they can actually replicate that and observe it firsthand. So if I go back to my tree analogy, if we were using that phenomena and we had gone through all of this, now at this point, we may be, taking a slice of a tree and looking at that up close and trying to count the rings, okay, or measure their thickness and count them, and sort rings of different size into different categories and try and figure out if there are cycles of drought and flooding and so on in an area. Okay, the inquiry process is how that is carried out. So the students would have to decide that they wanted to extend their knowledge by looking at drought, and by specifically looking at drought by counting rings of some of those trees that were there. And they would have to explain how they were going to count them. Are they just going to count them? Are they going to count the dark ones and the light ones? Only the dark, only the light? There's a lot of decisions that need to be made in leading up to actually carrying out that task. So, a lot of folks have made the mistake in the past putting the task first. And if you put the task first, the task doesn't really have a lot of relevance. It's just sort of something to observe. If we really approach sort of minds on before hands on, then what happens is we approach a task ultimately that fits its purpose. We understand the purpose of it, and what that task yields has relevance. Okay, so that's where this is coming from. So through planning and carrying out in inquiry investigation is how students encounter the investigative phenomena and the process. And they do so by using that scientific or engineering process, which I'm not getting into today. There's a million science engineering processes. The ones that NoAtom uses, we have refined over years and years of sort of testing, since the next generation science standards and its sort of foundational documentation have been emerging since, 2008, 2009 and forward, just because it's been great for teaching and learning, and it really does impact student data and retention and so on. If you ask our users anyway, I think they would back that up too. That investigative phenomenon process engages students in almost every science and engineering practice as they're going through all of these elements. And you should think of science class as not being 50 minutes. You should think about science class as being a collection of these experiences, okay? Like we talked about number 1 and number 2 and number 3. These are all different experiences, okay? And so they're taking place over multiple days. So in a middle school classroom, that may be easy to picture if you have students 2 or 3 or 5 days a week. Okay, if you're in an elementary classroom, you're chunking and breaking up time over the course of multiple days. It may be more time than you are given for science or that you use for science now. And that's a whole side discussion in terms of time on learning required, but it's not as much as you think. but it's maybe more than what you're used to. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up here and then take questions. The very end and purpose of going through this whole process is to leave that investigative phenomena, that experiment we planned and carried out, with data that we can use to form an evidence-based conclusion. And we, I mean myself as a student and my partner and my team. Okay, because we planned this investigation together, and that's key. We planned it together. We had to collaborate. We had to compromise. We had to, mesh heads and come up with a specific approach we were going to use, our ideas. And we got the data, and now we're going to form an evidence-based conclusion following that claim evidence reasoning model. But the thing is, it goes beyond that, because we need to reflect back on our problem or question, because that's what the conclusion is about. But it also informs our understanding of the anchor phenomena. Remember, that's how we got started. We were looking at something complex that we wanted to understand, or we wanted a problem we wanted to solve. And so we decided to go down a path once we became dissatisfied with what we knew were the solutions that were available. And we came up with that problem or question. And then we were able to gather evidence around what we thought maybe the answer or solution in that prototype. And then as a result of the data we gathered, we now know more about it, which helps us know more about how that problem could be solved in the anchor phenomena, or question about the phenomena be answered. Okay, so evidence-based conclusion is the result of experimentation or prototyping. It is, specific, logical, defensible, and it has to be data-based. And it's what we're using to reflect back on that anchor phenomena. They should vary. Okay, certainly the data that students gather should vary, because they're kids, they're human. They have different ideas, but they also make mistakes and they measure things inappropriately. And so if all of the data is identical, you've missed learning opportunities, and you've missed opportunities for authentic engagement and discussion. And again, back to that Socratic model, with varied data, you now have different opinions in class, where those opinions can be brought together, and the data that underlies that opinion can be brought out, and we can think through that as a group. Okay, really, really rich context for discussion. Now, students encounter that as a result of the inquiry process. It's sort of the cap to it. And, again, these evidence-based conclusions are not necessarily just one person's idea. By doing it in this way that we've been describing, and having students authentically engage and engage hands-on, I guess that's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, is that really engaging the phenomena hands-on is really key. Simulation is just an artist's representation of reality, but it's not a perfect representation of reality. And it also has some developmental limitations when you start to look, especially at elementary school and early elementary school, or English language learners, children who come from an environment where, they're not used to manipulating things on iPads and, inferring things from colors and so on and so forth in a 2D representation, where something in real life is three-dimensional and actually, behaves in a much different way. So, something to think about there. And in these conclusions, students are engaging, yet again, more practices, arguing from evidence, evaluating and communicating information, constructing explanations, and so on. And again, I just want to point out the numbering here, I'm not missing one. If you've been looking at this, the numbering's not right. I'm not missing anything. They've been omitted because they just don't. There are 8 science and engineering practices, and some of them don't apply to this particular segment. So that's why it's been pulled off. But when you look across all 5 of these pieces that I've discussed with you so far today, you'll see all 8 are there, and they're there more than once, okay, across this process. So I'm going to take questions in a second. So if you've got any, or if you're sitting with a group, feel free to click the button and start dropping those in, and I'm going to grab them. just a quick recap. There's 5 basic steps to using phenomena most effectively. First of all is to find a real-world anchor phenomena. And again, if you're a NoAtom user on this, you don't need to do it. It's already set up for you. That's what you're doing already. And through the rest of these, that's the case. If you're a NoAtom user and something that you see here is news to you, it means that you haven't been using your resources as they're designed, which means you have an opportunity for some additional gains, which is great. And if you have any questions, reach out to us. If you're a non-user, you don't use NoAtom, that's fine. These are all things you can do in your class. Okay, so find real-world anchor phenomena and use that as the basis, right, to start the process. Now, you're going to use that just to kind of put it up in front of folks and read about it, but actually that phenomena is going to become the platform for discussion through Socratic dialogue. And then as the teacher, our role starts to shift towards coach, because Socratic dialogue is something that should be student-centered, and you should be training them to ask those questions of each other. And in part 3, you want to facilitate students at arriving at a question or problem that they can investigate. And I recommend doing this as a class so that you have a trajectory of questions and sort of a boundary, a reasonable boundary on the investigations, because discussion for another time, but you don't want students just sort of, kind of with comic book questions and problems, but you want to really hold them accountable and create an environment where they can compare their findings to somebody else. So that sort of means arriving at a central question or problem as a group, and then whether or not that's in your teacher guide, and that's the art. If you have certain materials like in NoAtom and there are questions and problems laid out, you can facilitate students artfully arriving at the same basic question or problem that you hope that they will investigate simply by asking the right kinds of questions. Okay. Number 4, you're coaching students as they carry out their plan. So they, between 3 and 4 here, they are going from their question or problem, creating a plan. So you're going to coach them in that creation process by being, an interested skeptic, right? Not asking a question, telling an answer, or saying that's right or that's wrong, but you're asking, is that how a scientist would do it? Or, is that consistent with what we read about? Or do you agree with your partner's idea? You ask these types of questions, and what happens is you start to get students mixing ideas and perspectives. It's really important. So again, coach and not expert in this. You're skillfully creating the environment for inquiry here. And then lastly, as an interested skeptic, help students use their data to form defensible, logical database conclusions, and don't let lessons and units exist in isolation. Okay, students should always, number 1, within a lesson, be able to reflect back on that lesson's anchor phenomena. Okay, again, that's that loop that you see with this yellow arrow here. Okay, going from that conclusion back to the anchor phenomena. But a well-constructed curriculum, each lesson scaffolds, so that anchor phenomena actually builds additional knowledge and relevancy in the very next lesson, and from one unit to the next. And oftentimes that's lost. And I think because we, as teachers, I know myself being in a classroom, it's easy to focus on my lesson plan. And what's not in my plan is, hey, you know what? This is part of a storyline. This is part of a continuum that exists outside of just the lesson and outside of just the unit. It's actually between lessons and between units. And that's really important part of making the most out of that phenomena and getting students truly engaged with it. So with that said, I'm going to grab questions. If for some reason we've got about 10 minutes or less for questions here, if I can't get to your question or you think of it after, or you're not on the live session, feel free to give Mary Ellen DeLacy a call if you're a phone person, or you can email myself, fvigent@noatom.com, or even Mary Ellen. You can also go to noatom.com, and there's a contact us and even chat buttons. There's all kinds of ways to get a hold of us. If you'd like to take a look at curriculum that's designed for the next generation science standards, where we have state-specific adoption and adaptation curricula as well for Massachusetts and California and those who kind of decided to do things a little differently than just pure NGSS. We have all of the above. You're welcome to go online and take a look at that. You can go to noadam.com and click curriculum and select your state, download a unit, look at all the kind of lesson progressions and so on. So while I'm waiting for the rest of those questions to come in, and not a sales pitch for NoAdam, but a slight plug. What we do is we're a group of teachers. We're based north of Boston. We serve schools and districts around the country, and we help schools and districts implement the next generation science standards or next generation instruction through professional development and through our curriculum and materials. So basically, teachers are able to and principals are able to focus on meeting students' needs, not looking for materials and trying to prepare those, not trying to reinvent the wheel with curriculum and try to figure out storylines and all of this sort of stuff. What are the right anchor phenomena? Instead, really focus on asking the questions, creating the environment, facilitating the discussions. And, as a teacher myself, that's what I always wished folks would do for me. So I'm glad to be a part of it. Okay, so question time. Let's see here. Okay, so some folks have asked about natural, formative, and summative assessment opportunities in the process. So they're everywhere. I'm going to back up to the diagram here. So natural, formative, I'm just going to go one at a time. So for folks who are perhaps not familiar with the difference between a formative and a summative assessment, a formative assessment is a low stakes, high frequency assessment that gives the teacher an opportunity to understand where a group of students is at, to use that information to inform their instruction. But a well-designed formative assessment also goes the other way. It is frequent and low-stakes feedback for the student to improve their understanding of learning and to improve their learning. So think about it as informing and shaping instruction, as well as informing and shaping learning. So it's having a benefit for both students and teachers. So in terms of formative assessment here, the Socratic dialogue has a lot of opportunity for formative assessment. In a way, it's a grand formative assessment kicking everything off. Because what's happening here is that we are getting a baseline on students, many, if not all, of students' science and engineering practices. Okay, it's also giving us a view into the student mind in terms of what they know and what they're able to sort of demonstrate and everything right at the get-go. Okay, and you'll see that with different levels of satisfaction and so on, dissatisfaction with and evidence for what any one student understands. And so, this will inform teachers' instruction around, as teachers, we talk about backfill, where are students coming from? Because, well-articulated curriculum should be K-12, right? It's one grade level supporting the next and increasing skills and content complexity and so on. If that's happening, teachers should have, say fourth graders coming in at a level that they can predict. But oftentimes, everybody is in their classroom in a sort of traditional model with a loose framework of what they're supposed to be doing and trying to make it all work. And that's not to be condescending or to be critical of teachers. I mean, it's what everybody's been asked to do and expected to do, and so that they're doing what they can. But it's not an easy way to get a group of students who are relatively in the same page. So that's one formative assessment opportunity. The actual process of students developing their investigations, there are checkpoints. I'm not really getting into the parts of the process because this is a big enough nut to crack today. But we do have other resources on our website if you'd like to take a look that go into process and how all that works. But within a scientific process or within an engineering process, there are stages, just like in the cycle that you see here, right? This instructional process. And so students, if they're released with responsibility, they are developing with their partner that question. Maybe they're going through gathering facts around the research from what they've read, from what's been discussed, and then they're forming their idea of what they believe is a potential solution in an engineering context or a potential answer to that question in a scientific context. And then they would come to a checkpoint where checking in with the teacher and actually explaining, hey, this is what I've done, and gives the teacher the opportunity to be the interested skeptic, and it gives the student an opportunity to present their thoughts and to get feedback. And so on both sides, now the teacher is going to see where the student's content understanding is and how they've used vocabulary, their depth of sort of thinking through what they've done, but they're also going to see the students' science and engineering practices being played out. They're going to have an opportunity to redirect the class if they need to at that point, after they've seen maybe a couple of teams check in. But another piece of this is that for the student has an interested skeptic who's going to be asking questions and actually redirecting them skillfully, and also holding them accountable for their thinking. So just because you wrote it down, I'm not going to necessarily accept it. I'm going to ask you a question. So, if you have something in your research section, I may say, well, how is that relevant to this question? And if a student can't tell me how it's relevant, then as a teacher, I'm not going to accept it. I want them to go back and discuss it or to change it because that is my level of expectations. And then once they pass that checkpoint, they get to progress further in their planning. So the key is that that planning process has multiple, I would say, 3 to 4 checkpoints in it. And those 3 to 4 checkpoints act as a formative assessment for both teacher and student. And then as a result of the carrying out the investigation, students get data. That's sort of a self-correcting piece there because if students follow their procedure or they don't, they actually are going to get different results. And so when it comes time for forming that evidence-based conclusion, again, students have to use that data. So they're going to have to reflect on it. They're going to have to explain it. And then there's probably a checkpoint where they may be checking in with the teacher, explaining, and the teacher may be asking questions and they have to go get a U-turn and make some changes and so on. But ultimately we come to this group debrief, which is again a formative assessment. So in a formative sense, students are going to be learning other people's ideas about their work and other people's evidence that either supports or doesn't support their work, and vice versa. And so they're going to have this opportunity to reflect back on the anchor phenomena and also to be able to adjust their ideas or their perspective. And it's a very sort of healthy clinical type of argument. It's not a mean, I'm trying to win and inflict pain type argument here. What it is it's a challenging of ideas. Okay, so it's the sort of highest form of argument. So that's the formative side. Within NOADM's curriculum, if you're a user, there are concept assessments at the end which take students through a scenario that's related to things that they've learned about, but it's again not the result of direct instruction. So we tease out over a series of questions whether a student can demonstrate mastery of that performance expectation in 3 dimensions. Now, in a summative sense, and I'll try to go a little quicker with this, a summative assessment tends to be infrequent, high stakes, and something that is really just summing up what a student know or can do, okay? So in a sense, a lot of what I just described could be used with a rubric, like we provide rubrics to sum up where a student is at any given moment. But the sort of natural opportunities for summative assessment are things like, you have things like vocabulary homework, right? Or you may have, like we have word splashes that we use where there are concepts and students are asked to make a connection from one concept to the next and to explain in their own words how those are connected. That's both formative and summative. And that's the thing, is that the right type of assessments to have in these next generation science standards classrooms, whether you're using our curriculum or somebody else's or whatever, it's the right kind of assessment really can play the role of formative and summative. It comes down to whether you are isolating just this moment in time or whether you're looking over a broader period of time. Okay, the summative assessment that most people think about are worksheets. Okay, but things like worksheets don't have a place in these types of standards and in this type of instruction. Maybe a thread of it does, in, like I was mentioning earlier, something like a vocabulary worksheet that you might send home for homework, or a ticket to leave, and partially because you're just, I don't know, either trying to fill time like the ticket to leave, or because you need to assign homework and this is something that fits practically into the child's after school, so on. I don't know that I even agree with having to do that sort of a thing, but another way to look at summative assessment in this sort of model is that the students' planned investigations are summative of where their skills and content knowledge is at any given point in time. So you can actually look at the elements of the 3 dimensions and you can see that. Okay, you can see it played out in the discussion, you can see it play out in the planning, you can see it play out in how the students carry out their plans and the data that they gather, whether it's orders of magnitude off. You can see it in the conclusion. So again, all potential summative opportunities. You can look at it at their level of engagement in the discussions. And in the case of using a tool like Soccer Circle, you actually get a transcript of that discussion. So that's something that's, again, tangible evidence, which is summative of that student that day at that point in time. And then things like the concept checks I mentioned earlier, that scenario, shows where they're at the moment. But could you treat that as an end of chapter or end of unit test? Sure, you could. I don't know that that has the most value. Certainly, if a student and a teacher can adjust their approach to teaching and learning as a formative assessment, that has value. As a summative assessment just for a grade, I don't think that's worth the time just for a grade. But I'm sure some people use it that way. Okay, a couple more questions in here, and I will let you all go. Unfortunately, we have run over a couple minutes. Some folks have said thank you very much. Others have asked if a copy of this presentation will be available, and the answer is yes. Everybody who has signed up for the live webinar will be emailed a link to a recording of this webinar, so you'll get a copy that way. I would also encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, us by us, I mean No Adam, and subscribe to our blog. The blog, these are all free things that you can subscribe to. And what you'll also see is we will publish in a couple of weeks an ebook on this topic, as well as there'll be some blog posts coming out related to it as well. And we also have a resources section of our website where we have hundreds of webinars and resources, downloadables, ebooks, all that sort of stuff, where you're welcome to engage them. They're free. You can use them to enrich your own understanding or to share with somebody else. If you're looking for something else, please, I'll put my information and Mary Ellen's information up here, or you can just go to the website, reach out to No Adam or to one of us, and we would be happy to try and find you what you need. If you and your team, related to the next question here, folks are asking about resources. If your team is at a point of trying to decide what to do with curriculum, trying to decide how to implement the next generation science standards, or perhaps you've been piloting one of these, quote unquote, next generation aligned products that are out there that are being given out for free or so on and so forth, and you're not satisfied with the data that you're getting back, and I haven't even gotten into data, I didn't have time today, but if you're looking to get the engagement, make the alignment, and also get the data, we'd be happy to work with you. We are, at this point in time, setting up engagements for school districts for September. And so all of our current clients obviously are in place and come first, but we do have limited capacity depending on what part of the country you're in, but we do serve the whole continental US as well as Alaska and Hawaii. So we'd be happy to connect with you if that's something that you're looking at, or in the future. All right, well, thank you again. And if I wasn't able to get to your question, please feel free to reach out. And I really wish you the best of luck on your NGSS journey. Bye-bye.